you're right. So many entrepreneurs don't lead out loud. They just make all kinds of assumptions because they're still leading from a place of an idea.
I'm your host, Amy Walker, and this is your place to be for getting great insights and information into how to be a better entrepreneur, a better leader, and giving you some industry experts to guide you on that journey. Our guest today is Ron Carucci. Welcome, Ron. We're so excited to have you.
Amy, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. We appreciate your time. So let me introduce you to Ron. He is the co-founder and managing partner at Novolent. He works with CEOs and executives pursuing transformational change for their organizations, leaders, and industries. And he has a 30-year track record of helping some of the world's most influential executives tackle the challenges of strategy, of organization, and leadership. So from the startup phase to the Fortune 10s and turnarounds and helping with new marketing strategies, overhauling leadership and culture to really create growth for their company. So we're excited to dig into some juicy leadership tips today.
Amy, I'm excited about the conversation.
Awesome. So Ron, first of all, I'd love to hear a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey and how you got started in recognizing that leadership was such a critical part of the business puzzle.
Well, so I've been at this for a while, about 30 years. I don't know that when I began my career, it was in a slightly different field. Mm-hmm. And I think that, it was more in media. And I learned early on that, telling great stories is very interesting, but entering other people's stories to help them shape their future and their story was far more interesting. And because I bore easily, I found my way into a field, and I was very fortunate early on to do so, that would never be boring. That every day, the challenges, the problems, the stories that I get to enter would be different. And to accompany leaders on the most sacred parts of their own professional and personal journeys is a sacred place. And so from early on, I recognized it was a privilege. I learned also that you can do this work inside big organizations, and that has its own set of precarious, challenges to it. But early on, I began to collect up these things that my children loved because it meant more time with dad, but I began to collect severance packages. And I realized that what got me a little bit in trouble inside big companies, because I thought they wanted me to tell them the truth, got me paid very well outside companies. And so I thought, well, I shouldn't fight this anymore. I need to go do this as ancient wisdom says you can't be a prophet in your own land. Yeah. And so I thought I should go outside and do this where it can be welcomed and I can have impact. And so did that for a while. And then 14 years ago, I don't know that I had any entrepreneurial instincts in me that said, I want to start my own firm with my friends. I think we loved the work we did. We're passionate about this field. And when we began in our careers, decades ago, this wasn't a center plate discipline, organizations and leadership. And now it is. Now it's, plenty of people doing this, or at least claiming to. So when we started our firm, it was, we had been acquired by a bigger firm before this. And it was more about feeding the dinosaur and, just more about the internal machinations of being partners, not the craft of caring and curating leadership change. Mm-hmm. So we thought we can still have our dream. We can still do what we love to do, but we can do it on our own. So we went and started Novolent. And I don't think we ever expected what it meant to actually have to grow a firm and run a firm and do all the things entrepreneurs do. And but we've been here 14 years, so
congratulations.
We don't get to use the word startup anymore, even though some days it still feels like it.
I love that. So I would like to kind of start off this with a conversation around culture. One of the things that I've noticed with entrepreneurs is they assume that there will be a culture that will develop without proactively cultivating it. And they want their team to be mind readers, that they have these internal sets of values that they've never externally vocalized. And then there's frustration because the team's not getting it. So when you work with an organization, what do you do to help them craft an amazing culture?
Well, that's a great question, Amy. And most entrepreneurs think, early on is too soon. When I ask
Mm-hmm.
them questions of strategy, which I think values is a part of how you want to shape your future, I get counterfeits. I get the mission statement. I get the business plan they used to get their Series A money. I get a value set they Googled. I get a product quote, or I get, the business plan that says here's our finances for the first 2 years, but I don't get an identity. I don't get a sense, okay, that's all interesting, but tell me who you are. Tell me why you can compete and win. Tell me why somebody would choose to do business with you. And there's crickets. And when you lean in to go, well, how will you do this? You're right. So many entrepreneurs don't lead out loud. They just make all kinds of assumptions because they're still leading from a place of an idea, not
Right.
from a place of scaling an idea. And they confuse growth with scaling. So if orders are coming in and revenue's coming in, they assume that's growth. It's just more work and it's more revenue, but it's not scaling. And to be able to scale and replicate, you have to have a sense for what the norms are, right? What is it we're going to do? And too often, at very best, they think culture is values, right? They think that if we just brainstorm that, here's our ways of working or our core principles, or give whatever name they give them, and put them on a wall or put them on a placard or put them on a screensaver, we're good to go. We have culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not how culture works, right? I mean, there's so many things that shape behavior in organizations. And if you want the way we work around here to feel a certain way and look a certain way, you have to think about how you set direction, how you allocate resources, who gets to make what decisions, how you reward contributions, how you include others in decisions that affect them, how much they're empowered. All of the things in a system that shape people's behavior have to be consistent with those values. And if you don't embed those values into all the places they'll show up, you get duplicity. You get a sense where you say this, but you do this. And
Right.
the problem with starting with the codification of values is that you now have a weapon of mass destruction. I now have a screen to show you all the ways you're hypocritically not following these, and that's my excuse not to either.
That's
And
powerful.
and so it's important that you're shaping culture every day, whether you do it on purpose or not. All the behavioral scientists are still debating is culture a means or an end. Spoiler alert, it's both.
Uh-huh.
And you have to treat it as both. You have to treat it as a lever to shape performance. And you have to treat it as an outcome of other factors that you have to pay attention to, because if they don't match, people draw conclusions. And if people sense duplicity between what you say and what you do, first of all, we now have research that says that sets the stage for dishonest behavior, right? You're 3 times more likely to have people lying and withholding information if people sense there's duplicity in your identity and their work. And more importantly, you're going to have turnover. You're going to have people checking in. And the worst thing is not that your talented people quit and leave, it's that your untalented ones quit and stay.
Right. That is so true. Oh my goodness. And if you don't have a culture that has checks and balances against that, then people feel like they have a really hard time getting rid of the D and C players on your team. But the problem is, if you've got a team with D and C players, they're dragging down your A players, and now your A players are B players. And so you have this average culture and this average output from your people. So I want to talk a little bit about how this manifests as a startup versus as a company who's growing through growth and scalability versus a company who is managing a lot of people now. Do you see that the conversation adjusts depending on which phase of business they're in?
Well, it becomes more complex, right? And the longer you defer the work you need to do to set a foundation, the more difficult it becomes later, because changing bad habits that form over time is more difficult versus like the foundation of good habits and practices and expectations that just scale with you. But scalability is a function of mitosis, right? So just like as humans form inside their moms, cells divide. As you grow, work divides. And too often leaders from the very beginning don't pay attention to how when work divides, so does behavior. And you have to pay attention to the way the work is dividing, because you just can't let it divide randomly. And the hardest thing for entrepreneurs to accept early on is that not all work is created equal, right? You have work that's competitive work that really is I put $1 in, $5 comes in the door, and I have to protect that. I have work that supports that, and that's maybe 30% of my work. And then the third bucket is necessary work, and that's about 60% of the work that you have to do at par with maximum efficiency. But of course, in the world of a mayhem startup, you get the necessary work mixed with the competitive work, and now it's diluted. And so carefully curating how you bucket the work and how you set boundaries, that's your beginning of organization. How you build the coordination between those buckets, that's where you begin to shape behavior and culture. And so if you have silos and rivalry, if you have secrecy, if you don't have information that moves readily enough, if you don't have expectations about who cooperates with who owns what decisions, that's when people find behaviors to work around what's expected of them to get something done. And that's where your pathologies begin to appear.
Right.
And your underground collusion and your up and over behavior and your withholding frustrations or your expression of frustrations in very unhealthy ways. And all your big bad habits begin to form because of the way you shaped the organization wasn't healthy from the beginning. So then all those bad habits just grow up with you grow up from startup to grow up, and then grow up to, you get stuck in adolescence and you never get to a place where you can actually mature.
All problems unaddressed grow. So they're only going to get bigger. And, it's funny how many people don't want to address them when they're small because they think it's not a high priority. So why would you want to wait until your problems are the high priority? That's always my thought on that.
I tell the CEOs in a startup or scaling phase all the time, if you don't take the time to stop working in your business and take the time to work on your business now, it's going to work on you over time, and it'll be so stuck you'll have to smash it to make it change. It's because at some point those bad habits become sedentary, those practices become entrenched, and your ability to dislodge them and create the agility you need to change and grow is almost impossible. And then you have to layer over people, you have to take people out. You're not selecting with the right eye. You're selecting with all the wrong neurotic insecurities of you're picking your friends, you're picking people you're putting people in that can't do the job, but you want to give them a chance, and everybody else is talking about them. And so now you're really making a very psychotic culture out of the environment of people who are like, who are we today? And when you have that kind of paralysis and it takes people that long to feel good in their own skin and feel like their own identity contradicts the identity of the organization, now you're really pushing people into your words, the B and C layer place, because I'm not going to bring my A game to a place I don't trust, to a place I don't feel safe, to a place that doesn't make sense to me.
So let's talk a little bit about the gig economy that we have going on right now, because a lot of new and emerging companies, they have two sides of gigging. First of all, we're hiring in the virtual marketplace more, and we're bringing in more people for, independent contractors. Because of this gig economy, you can get great talent that's not really on your team. It's got tax advantages. And then also a lot of our team members are also gigging on the side. So I feel like the last few years of this gig economy is kind of changing some things in the leadership scene. What are you seeing, and what do you think is important for us to be aware of as we're hiring a lot more independent contractors, but trying to still create a cohesive environment? And as we know that our team members are not as loyal as they were 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. So we all, it's all okay to have side hustles, right? I do think that if you're the inside out one's a little bit more complex because you're competing for the share of mind and heart, which means rather than there are companies who are putting in policies that say no competitive side work and you can't, whatever. If somebody has a candle making business on the side, you can't stop them.
Right.
But if you get frustrated because they're more passionate about their candle making business than you, then you're the problem, right? Because then the problem is not that they're not motivated. They're just not motivated with you. So it behooves leaders then to create organizations so enriched with passion and opportunity and creativity, people can't not bring their best work. So that's that you're competing for their share of heart and mind means you have to compete harder. For the solopreneurs who are, gigging out to other places, I think the thing that's important for them to recognize is that there's no such thing as a solopreneur. You're not really working on your own, right? You have someone do your website, you have a VA, you have somebody do your marketing, email, so you have a team. You have someone do your dry cleaning, you have someone make your travel arrangements. So you have to treat that as an organization. You have to treat your time and curate how you want your work done as if that's your team. And so many solopreneurs don't do that. They're one gig at a time, and they get themselves overcommitted, or they spend time trying to get the phone to ring. Solopreneur is not for everybody. people often choose solopreneuring as a way to unchoose big organizations. So I don't want to work for the man, or I don't want to work I want to be invisible. And it's fine not to want to do those things, but it doesn't mean you can work on your own. So I think so many people are digging out and finding out that it's not for them, but they're stuck now. They have to pay the bills. So before anybody chooses a solopreneur career, I would be sure that really is, you're wired that way. So many people can't create their own structures. They can't create their own disciplines. They can't manage their time well. And it's hard for them.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
I think for those who are bringing in independent people, you've got to create an expectation that boundary between your 1099 status versus your W-2 status has got to be invisible. There can be no detection of that difference, and you got to make it very clear to the people who you're paying in some form, whether it's in a paycheck or an invoice, that when they're at your table and on your meter, here's how you behave, and here's how you contribute, and here's how we work together. And you have to make it very clear there could be no status differences. I don't want to see, oh yeah, I was an hour late for the meeting because I had to take my kids to school. Don't want to hear any of that if it's because you're not on my payroll. Because if it looks as though the 1099s get to behave in a different way than a W-2, boy, you got a real weird dynamic there, and some resentment and entitlement and all kinds of goofy things that start to happen there. So as a leader, you've really got to make sure any of that difference is neutralized in the prosecution of your own work.
And you have to be so careful with that, because legally there's a lot of things behaviorally that you can't control, otherwise they'll go in and tell you, just kidding, you have to make them an employee. So yeah, I think that it's a tricky area to navigate, because you can't tell them, you can't define their work hours. You can't tell them how they get from point A to point Z. They just have to get to point Z, and they're responsible for how they do it. So it's tricky.
I think it's a state by state thing, Amy. I do know that they cannot have a predominance of their hours be with your firm, right? That's what constitutes an employee. But I do think contractually you're allowed to put if they sign the contract and you have expectations for how they participate in the work, I do think you have a lot more control over that than you can't have them. They can't be held accountable to all the things in your employee policy manual. But in terms of prosecuting the work and collaborating, contributing, I do think that you're allowed to require that contractually. You can't have them be an employee in the same way others can. But I do think that a lot of times you have gig people have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, a little bit of entitlement around, I don't work for you kind of thing. And they create unhealthy dynamics, and they create division. And I think you have to manage that. And if people can't blend their voices in a way that optimizes everybody's contribution, then you probably shouldn't keep them.
Well, I think the real key to that is if they have that attitude, then they're not a team player, and they're not there to contribute, and they're not there to make everything better. They're there with a what's in it for me attitude, which is never going to be, and that's not conducive to any team environment. I have yet to meet an entrepreneur that creates a culture around everyone's going to show up and think what's in it for me. So it's just not collaborative.
At least that one that lasts, right? I mean, you do find a lot of those entitled people that show up, and they chose the gig economy because they thought that they deserved it, right? So I'm tired of being taken advantage of and being exploited and being a cog on your wheel. So now I'm doing it on my terms. But they so overcorrect that they don't realize the chip on their shoulders about an inch, a foot tall.
Right. Well, we are just about out of time here. I want to ask one last question. So my last question is, this conversation, I think, is one that all business owners need to have, but some entrepreneurs, they really started their business because they had a great idea and they had a great service, or they had a great product. And it's easy to hide behind that and not take on the challenge of, I've got to build myself into a better leader. What is your recommendation for how they get started with awareness around leadership?
Well, first of all, that's such a great distinction, Amy. And if that's not you, and it really isn't ever going to be you, accept that and get somebody else in to lead and scale the organization and the work for you. Don't try and contort yourself into something you're never going to be, because it's going to torture people. But if you're somebody who wants to evolve and adapt from a startup leader to an executive, There's ways to anticipate what you have to do. First of all, you have to set strategy. You have to set direction. You have to pick differentiation. You have to commit to swim lanes. Most entrepreneurs hate saying no, but it's so important that you create discipline, even when you have 6 people, on your way to 100 people. You have to do it early on. You have to divide the work up. You have to learn to lead and guide bodies of work that are different. And you have to go from being first chair to being the conductor and making everybody play the same music. And you have to learn to stand on that podium and not be the first chair. And then you have to learn to influence and exert your will. You have to be able to set expectations. You have to be able to give people feedback and coach. And you have to create leadership underneath you. Too often entrepreneurs let what's underneath them sag. They don't build the organization, and they can never elevate themselves because what's underneath them is pulling them down.
Right.
And so you have to create a platform on which you can actually be an executive. And the work that where mitosis happens is happening beneath you. If you can't change out the leaders below you, you just create such churn and disruption. And that journey from a few people to a few hundred people is very perilous because it happens very quickly, and it often gets masked by revenue, right? So if you have strong tailwinds at your back helping you get new orders, over time, people confuse that with success. People are calling, they want this, that must mean this is good. And there might be some indicators of that, but usually it's masking some of the diseases that are growing with it underneath that. And as a leader, you've got to be vigilant about that stuff. And some people just don't like doing that. And if you're not someone who can fall in love with working on the business the same way you fell in love with working in the business, then know that early on, and there's no shame in that. But don't try and force yourself to do something you won't do well and put other people's careers at risk and put your great idea at risk.
I love that. Embrace who you are and roll with what your skills are. And there's no right or wrong answer. I love that. All right. Well, we are just about out of time here. I'd love for you, Ron, to tell our listeners what's the best way to get connected with you and learn more about what you do.
Yeah, I'd love to stay in touch. So if you come to visit us at navalent.com, navalent.com, we have lots of great resources for younger leaders, entrepreneurial leaders there. We have a free magazine, a quarterly magazine that talks about all kinds of issues of business and strategy and teams and organization stuff. We have a free ebook for you. So if you're leading change, if you're leading on that transformational journey from startup to grow up, we have a free ebook called Leading Transformation. And it's at navalent.com/transformation. So come find us there. We've got great blog resources. We've got some great videos you can watch. So it's a rich cornucopia of content for you waiting to help you grow your business. I'm on Twitter at Ron Carucci, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. So would love to stay in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And for our viewers, make sure that first of all, you subscribe to the channel, because every Tuesday and Thursday, we're bringing you great interviews with industry experts to provide you the education that you need to grow your business. And also anyone that you know that's struggling in this leadership conversation, make sure you share the video with them. Thank you so much for being on. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you, Ron.
Amy, great to be with you.